Marla Grayson was the respected superintendent of Cayden Falls Correctional Facility, known for her strict discipline and unwavering dedication. Dorian Cruz was a dangerous inmate with a magnetic charm that unsettled everyone around him. When Marla was found dead in her home, the town was quick to call it a suicide. But beneath the surface, secrets whispered of a forbidden affair, a deadly love triangle, and a cover-up that could shake the very foundation of the prison system. What really happened behind those locked doors, and who silenced Marla forever? On the morning of February 6, 2023, the town of Cayden Falls woke up to news that would shake its quiet routine to the core. Marla Grayson, the well-respected superintendent of Cayden Falls Correctional Facility, was found dead inside her two-story colonial home on Hemlock Lane. Police arrived at the scene just after 7:00 a.m., responding to a welfare check requested by one of Marla's colleagues, who said she hadn't shown up for the morning shift briefing, something completely out of character. Inside the home, they found her lifeless body slumped against a kitchen cabinet, a revolver on the floor, and a handwritten note on the counter. The initial signs pointed to suicide. The gunshot wound appeared self-inflicted, and the note, brief and emotionless, suggested a farewell. Her house was locked from the inside, no signs of forced entry, no apparent struggle. It looked clean, quiet. Within hours, the local sheriff's office released a statement confirming her death and called it an apparent suicide. The town was stunned. Marla wasn't just another official. She was known for her professionalism, her leadership, and her intense commitment to reforming the jail system. She'd spent nearly 2 decades in the department and had been promoted to superintendent just the year before. Many considered her the future face of New York State corrections. But the more people thought about it, the less it made sense. Just 2 days before her death, Marla had attended a community outreach event, laughing with staff and speaking passionately about upcoming changes to inmate rehabilitation programs. She'd recently received praise from the State Oversight Board. Friends described her as energized and optimistic. She had dinner plans the night she died and had been exchanging texts about an upcoming trip to the Adirondacks. Suicide didn't fit. Whispers began almost immediately. How could someone who seemed so driven and composed suddenly end her life without warning? Why hadn't there been any signs? People close to her weren't satisfied with the quick ruling. A few noticed inconsistencies. Her phone had been turned off unusually early the night before, and her car keys were missing, only to be found later in a drawer she never used. The note left behind didn't sound like her at all. Short, impersonal, with none of her typical phrasing. As news of her death spread, so did the questions. Something felt off. It didn't take long before quiet suspicions turned into louder speculation, and when investigators looked closer at her personal life, what they found would not only challenge the theory of suicide, it would shatter it. As news of her death spread, so did the questions. Something felt off. It didn't take long before quiet suspicions turned into louder speculation. And when investigators looked closer at her personal life, what they found would not only challenge the theory of suicide, it would shatter it. In the days following Marla Grayson's death, investigators began combing through every detail of her life, looking for answers that the crime scene hadn't provided. Her work history was spotless, no reprimands, no formal complaints, and a long track record of leadership. But when detectives turned their attention to her personal life, they found a very different story unfolding beneath the surface. Marla had always been intensely private. She lived alone, had no children, and rarely spoke about her relationships. Those close to her described her as focused, even guarded, when it came to anything outside her job. But as police examined her home, they found a second phone tucked away in the back of her bedroom closet, hidden inside a shoebox beneath a pile of old scarves. It wasn't listed in her official records or tied to any of her accounts. The phone was still active, and what it contained turned the case on its head. Dozens of messages, sent at all hours, from a contact saved only as D. The tone of the text was deeply personal, flirtatious, emotional, sometimes even desperate. There were screenshots of money transfers, and several messages suggested secret meetups. This wasn't just a casual conversation. It was clear Marla had been involved in a romantic relationship, and she had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. Investigators ran the number through their system. It was linked to an inmate, Dorian Cruz, who had been housed at Cayden Falls Correctional Facility for nearly 3 years before being abruptly transferred 6 months prior to Marla's death. Cruz had a long rap sheet, including armed robbery, drug trafficking, and assault. He wasn't just any inmate. He had been classified as high risk. This revelation shocked those who knew Marla. She had always enforced a strict no-tolerance policy when it came to inmate manipulation. But the evidence in her phone painted a different picture. She hadn't just broken protocol. She had risked everything for someone she should never have trusted. The messages also hinted at growing tension. In the final week of messages, there were mentions of betrayal, of secrets being exposed, and of someone else interfering. Marla had written that she was being watched, that she knew too much, and that they won't let this go quietly. These texts weren't just romantic. They were fearful. What began as a routine suicide investigation was now something far more complex. A respected jail superintendent, caught in a secret affair with a dangerous inmate, had expressed fear for her safety just days before her death. And whoever they were, investigators were now determined to find out. Dorian Cruz was no ordinary inmate. From the moment he arrived at Cayden Falls Correctional Facility, he made an impression. At 31 years old, he was intelligent and confident, with a sharp mind that seemed to operate on a different level than most of the other prisoners. His criminal record was serious. Convicted of armed robbery, assault, and involvement in drug trafficking, he had earned a reputation as someone not to be underestimated. Yet, despite the harsh nature of his crimes, Cruz had a way of charming those around him. Within the prison walls, Cruz was assigned to work in the library, a position that gave him access to books, computers, and, importantly, the staff. The library was a hub of quiet activity, and Cruz quickly became a familiar face to many corrections officers. His time there gave him the rare opportunity to interact with personnel beyond the usual security checks and limited inmate contact. He used this position skillfully, often engaging in conversations that went beyond the ordinary and sometimes even earning small privileges. Marla Grayson, the superintendent, was aware of Cruz's influence. Officially, she maintained a strict line between staff and inmates. However, some jail employees whispered about Cruz's ability to manipulate the system and the people who worked there. According to internal reports, several officers had been caught bending rules to grant Cruz special treatment. Yet Marla, as the superintendent, was supposed to be the one enforcing discipline and fairness. It was during Cruz's time in the library that the first signs of an inappropriate relationship with Marla emerged. While it was uncommon for a superintendent to spend time near the inmate work areas, Marla had been observed making unscheduled visits to the library late at night. Some staff members found this unusual but dismissed it as her dedication to overseeing all parts of the facility. The joke became that he had forged a diary to hold on to his own secrets. The 6 months before Marla's death, Cruz was suddenly transferred to a higher security prison in a different. Rumors circulated among the prison staff that the transfer was connected to some undisclosed investigation, but no official statement was ever made. The investigation later revealed that Cruz had a unique hold over both Marla and another staff member, Tara Lansing. This influence extended beyond simple favor trading. Cruz's charm and cunning had entangled two women in a dangerous and complex web of emotions and loyalties. Both women were drawn to him in ways that crossed professional boundaries, and the dynamics among them would prove to be deadly for their separate psychopaths. Understanding Cruz's personality and his impact inside the prison was key to unraveling the mysteries surrounding Marla Grayson's death. He was not just a prisoner. He was a man who could influence people in ways that made the simple explanation of suicide impossible to accept without question. As investigators dug deeper into the tangled relationships surrounding Dorian Cruz, another name emerged: Tara Lansing, a young corrections officer at Cayden Falls who had quickly risen through the ranks. Tara was known for her professionalism and strict adherence to rules, a favorite among her supervisors. Yet, evidence would later show that beneath this disciplined exterior, she was caught in a complicated and secretive connection to Cruz, one that rivaled Marla Grayson's involvement. Secret cell phone logs and surveillance footage revealed that Tara frequently visited the area near Cruz's cell during late-night shifts. These visits were unusual for someone at her level, and raised eyebrows among her co-workers. While prison protocol strictly forbade such personal interactions with inmates, the cameras caught her lingering longer than necessary, speaking quietly in hallways and exchanging small items. Digital forensics added another layer to the story. Investigators recovered deleted emails and encrypted messages from Tara's work laptop. Among these were conversations labeled with cryptic names and phrases like Plan B, hinting at a plot or scheme. The tone of these messages ranged from emotional to urgent, suggesting Tara's involvement in matters far beyond her professional duties. The discovery raised a critical question. Was she acting independently, or was she part of a larger conspiracy? The presence of two women in Cruz's orbit hinted at a dangerous love triangle. Both Marla and Tara were drawn to the same man, each in their own way. Marla's relationship seemed more established, secretive, and fraught with tension, while Tara's connection appeared newer but no less intense. The dynamics between the three were complex, mixing power, desire, and manipulation in ways that blurred the lines between victim and perpetrator. Jealousy and rivalry simmered beneath the surface. Some staff members noticed subtle shifts in workplace behavior. Tara grew increasingly distant from her colleagues, and Marla, once confident and composed, appeared more guarded. The two women's paths crossed less often, but when they did, the tension was palpable. The question that haunted investigators was whether this tension had exploded into violence. Tara Lansing's sudden resignation shortly after Marla's death added another layer of suspicion. She left without explanation and declined to speak to the press or investigators. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. The dynamics between the three were complex, mixing power, desire, and manipulation in ways that blurred the lines between victim and perpetrator. Jealousy and rivalry simmered beneath the surface. Some staff members noticed subtle shifts in workplace behavior. Tara grew increasingly distant from her colleagues, and Marla, once confident and composed, appeared more guarded. The two women's paths crossed less often, but when they did, the tension was palpable. The question that haunted investigators was whether this tension had exploded into violence. Tara Lansing's sudden resignation shortly after Marla's death added another layer of suspicion. She left without explanation and declined to speak to the press or investigators. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. If the relationship with Cruz had contributed to the tragedy, was Tara a witness, a participant, or something else entirely? The dangerous love triangle was no longer just a rumor. It became a central piece in the puzzle of what truly happened to Marla Grayson. Behind the walls of the prison, a story of desire, betrayal, and power struggles was unfolding, one that would soon reveal a far darker truth than anyone had imagined. The scene at Marla Grayson's home had initially seemed straightforward: a suicide staged with a note, a gunshot wound, and no signs of forced entry or struggle. But as forensic experts took a closer look, cracks began to appear in the official story. The details didn't quite add up. First, the gun itself raised questions. The revolver found beside Marla's body had no fingerprints, neither hers nor anyone else's. Typically, in a self-inflicted gunshot, investigators would expect to find traces of gunshot residue on the victim's hands, a sign that the weapon was recently fired close by. But in Marla's case, the lab tests came back negative. The absence of residue suggested that the gun might have been planted after her death or fired by someone else. Then there was the note. Handwriting analysts compared the note left at the scene to Marla's known writing sample. They found it inconsistent. Some letters were formed differently, and the pressure applied to the paper was uneven. It seemed rushed or even deliberately altered. Unlike Marla's usual neat and precise handwriting, the note was almost sloppy and impersonal. This raised suspicions that the note might have been written by another hand or forged to look like a farewell. The kitchen floor told its own story. Forensic teams noticed faint drag marks near the body, small scuffs that suggested Marla's body had been moved after she was shot. This contradicted the narrative of someone simply falling or collapsing after shooting themselves. Medical examiners also discovered bruises on Marla's arms and a fractured wrist, injuries inconsistent with suicide and more in line with a struggle or restraint. These injuries had not been noted in the initial autopsy, which had been conducted hastily and without the benefit of a full forensic team. Adding to the mystery was the toxicology report. Marla's blood showed elevated levels of sedatives and anti-anxiety medication. The amounts were enough to impair her ability to react or defend herself, but not high enough to cause death. It raised the possibility that she was drugged before the shooting occurred. Despite these irregularities, the local authorities held firmly to their ruling of suicide. Official statements maintained that there was no evidence of foul play, and the case was closed swiftly. But the inconsistencies could not be ignored. Friends and family pressed for a deeper investigation, and independent experts questioned how such crucial details had been overlooked or dismissed so quickly. The growing doubts surrounding the scene at Marla's home transformed what had seemed like a tragic suicide into a potential murder disguised as one. Every new piece of evidence pointed to someone trying to cover their tracks, and the question became not just how Marla died, but who wanted the truth hidden. One of the most troubling discoveries in the investigation came from the prison's security system. When authorities requested the surveillance footage covering the days leading up to Marla Grayson's death, they found something alarming. Key footage from January 10th through January 18th was missing. These 8 days fell squarely within a crucial time frame when Marla had reportedly been under increased stress, according to her messages and staff accounts. The prison's surveillance cameras were supposed to be a permanent record, automatically storing footage for at least 90 days. But when the IT department reviewed the logs, it showed that the data for this particular period had been manually deleted. This was not a technical glitch or accidental erasure. It was a deliberate wipe. Someone with high-level access had erased the recordings, effectively erasing any visual record of what happened inside the facility during those critical days. Only 2 people had the clearance to delete footage: Marla Grayson herself and her trusted deputy, Captain Ellis Rohn. Investigators questioned Rohn extensively. He denied any involvement and claimed he had no idea why the footage was missing. When confronted with the evidence, his answers were vague and evasive. Days later, Rohn unexpectedly submitted his resignation and disappeared from the public eye, refusing interviews or further contact with the police. The timing of Rohn's resignation raised suspicions. It suggested he might have known more than he was willing to reveal or felt pressure from inside the department. Staff members whispered about internal conflicts, power struggles, and loyalty tests within the prison administration. Some speculated that Rohn's resignation was a quiet way to avoid becoming entangled in a scandal that could ruin careers and lives. Meanwhile, the missing footage created a black hole in the timeline. Without it, investigators had no way to verify who had visited Cruz's cell block, when Marla made her late-night library visits, or what interactions might have taken place between the staff and inmates during those days. This gap meant key events could have been hidden from view, deliberately erased to protect certain individuals or to cover up illegal activity. The erased footage was more than just lost video. It was a glaring sign that someone within the prison's own ranks was involved in hiding the truth. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation, shifting the focus from a possible personal tragedy to a deeper, more dangerous conspiracy. The question now was no longer just about Marla's death, but about the lengths to which people would go to keep dark secrets locked away behind bars. Weeks into the investigation, a mysterious package arrived at the state's Internal Affairs Office, sent anonymously from an unknown source. Inside was a thick folder filled with photocopies of internal prison documents, emails, and handwritten notes. Alongside these papers was a small flash drive containing digital files and a list of names, staff members and inmates alike, marked with cryptic symbols and annotations. This package would come to change the direction of the entire case. The documents revealed a side of the prison that few outsiders had ever seen. Among them were complaints Marla Grayson had filed in the weeks leading up to her death. These complaints detailed serious issues: officers allowing contraband into the jail, misuse of authority by some supervisors, and unauthorized privileges being granted to certain inmates. Marla appeared to be trying to clean up a system that was deeply corrupt. One of the most alarming notes warned, "Someone inside is protecting Dorian Cruz." This was a direct reference to the inmate with whom Marla had been secretly involved. The documents suggested that certain staff members were shielding Cruz from consequences, allowing him access and influence that endangered the integrity of the entire facility. The protective network was reportedly so entrenched that it was nearly impossible to expose without risking retaliation. Among the emails on the flash drive were messages between Marla and an unidentified internal affairs agent, scheduled for a confidential meeting just 2 days after her death. The emails implied Marla was prepared to reveal significant information about illegal activities inside the jail, including details about Cruz's special treatment and the staff members involved. It seemed she had reached a breaking point, ready to blow the whistle on a dangerous and hidden operation. This new evidence also exposed the culture of silence within the prison staff. Many employees were reluctant to speak openly, fearing consequences from colleagues or superiors. The list of names included individuals who had either been transferred suddenly or had left the department under unclear circumstances in recent months. The implication was clear. Those who stood in the way of the corrupt system were quickly removed or silenced. The anonymous whistleblower's package injected fresh urgency into the case. It suggested Marla's death was not an isolated tragedy, but connected to a wider conspiracy, one that involved abuse of power, cover-ups, and possibly murder. Investigators began to question whether Marla had been killed to stop her from exposing the truth, and who might have been willing to go to such lengths. The documents and digital files opened a new chapter in the investigation, one where the prison itself was no longer just a backdrop, but the center of a dangerous game with deadly consequences. As investigators continued to unravel the tangled web surrounding Marla Grayson's death, the atmosphere at Cayden Falls Correctional Facility grew increasingly tense. Staff members were guarded, many unwilling to speak freely, while rumors of internal conflicts and distrust circulated quietly among employees. The investigation was exposing uncomfortable truths, and those implicated seemed determined to protect themselves at all costs. One of the most disturbing revelations came from a small group of whistleblowers within the prison who, fearing for their safety, agreed to provide anonymous testimonies. These insiders described a culture of intimidation where staff who questioned orders or tried to report misconduct faced threats, harassment, or sudden transfers to less desirable positions. The environment was described as one where loyalty to the institution and to certain powerful individuals was more important than truth or justice. Several witnesses recounted unusual incidents in the weeks leading up to Marla's death. There were reports of meetings held late at night in restricted areas of the facility, attended only by senior staff. Some employees spoke of secret conversations involving Captain Ellis Rohn, the superintendent's recently resigned deputy, suggesting that he might have been involved in orchestrating efforts to keep certain information hidden. Perhaps most alarming were the accounts describing pressure placed on staff to remain silent about Marla's affair with Dorian Cruz. According to these testimonies, some employees had been warned directly or indirectly to avoid discussing the matter, with the threat that doing so could end their careers or worse. This silence wasn't just about protecting reputations. It seemed to be part of a calculated effort to control the narrative around the superintendent's death. The whistleblowers also hinted at possible tampering with evidence and interference in the investigation itself. Several reported seeing unexplained visitors near key crime scene areas and irregular activity involving security equipment. Some mentioned that certain files and records were difficult to access or appeared altered, fueling suspicion that someone within the prison administration was actively working to derail the truth. Despite the risks, these brave insiders pushed forward, helping investigators piece together a clearer picture of the internal power struggles at play. Their testimony suggested that Marla Grayson's death was not simply a personal tragedy, but the climax of a battle between those seeking reform and those intent on maintaining control through corruption and fear. The prison, once viewed as a place of order and discipline, was revealed to be a battlefield where loyalties were tested, secrets were buried, and lives were at risk. In this high-stakes environment, the question loomed larger than ever. Who stood to gain from Marla's silence, and how far would they go to keep it that way? With mounting evidence suggesting a cover-up, the focus of the investigation shifted toward those closest to Marla Grayson within the prison administration. Captain Ellis Rohn, Marla's deputy who had resigned suddenly and disappeared from public view, became a prime person of interest. His abrupt departure and evasive answers to investigators only deepened suspicions that he was hiding something critical. When investigators obtained Rohn's personal phone and computer, they uncovered encrypted messages between him and an unknown third party. These messages suggested coordination to manipulate evidence, influence witness testimonies, and manage the narrative that Marla's death was a suicide. Some communications hinted at plans to silence anyone threatening to reveal the truth, though no direct threats were found. Further digging revealed that Rohn had met secretly with Tara Lansing, the corrections officer also entangled with Cruz, multiple times shortly before Marla's death. These meetings, often in unmonitored locations within the prison, raised the possibility that Rohn and Tara might have conspired to cover up the affair, or worse. The dynamics within this trio were far more complex and dangerous than initially thought. The investigation also uncovered financial irregularities linked to Rohn. Large sums of money had been moved through accounts connected to his name, raising questions about bribery and kickbacks. Some of these funds appeared to be linked to contraband smuggling within the prison, a lucrative but illicit operation that Marla had been trying to dismantle. Despite the mounting pressure, Rohn remained missing, refusing to respond to subpoenas or public appeals. Law enforcement issued a warrant for his arrest, but he seemed to have vanished without a trace. His disappearance only fueled speculation that he might have fled to avoid prosecution or worse. As the net tightened, it became clear that Rohn's role in the events leading up to Marla's death was pivotal. Whether he was directly involved in her murder or complicit in a cover-up was still uncertain. But what was undeniable was that the shadow of corruption and betrayal ran deep within Cayden Falls Correctional Facility, and Ellis Rohn was at its heart. The question now was whether justice could reach him before more damage was done. The case of Marla Grayson's death took on a haunting new dimension as investigators grappled with the tangled threads of love, betrayal, and corruption that wove through Cayden Falls Correctional Facility. Months of digging, interviews, and forensic analysis had peeled back layers of secrecy, but the full truth still seemed just out of reach. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Marla's death as a tragic suicide caused by the unbearable weight of her secret affair and the pressure to maintain her reputation. Others believed it was a carefully orchestrated murder designed to silence a woman determined to expose corruption and criminal activity inside the prison. The town remained on edge, haunted by the unresolved questions and rumors. New leads continued to surface, including witnesses who suddenly recalled important details, and former staff members willing to come forward anonymously. Investigators revisited the crime scene multiple times, each time uncovering new clues overlooked in the initial rush to close the case. Every piece of evidence pointed to a dark conspiracy, but proving it in court remained a challenge. One of the most crucial breakthroughs came when a previously undisclosed recording surfaced. An audio file from a hidden microphone planted in a secure office within the prison. The recording captured a heated conversation between Captain Ellis Rohn and another senior officer discussing handling the situation and keeping things quiet. While the recording did not explicitly mention Marla or her death, the tone and timing suggested a cover-up was in motion before her body was even found. Despite the mounting evidence, the case stalled. Rohn's disappearance made it difficult to hold key players accountable. Tara Lansing's sudden resignation and refusal to cooperate with investigators only added to the frustration. Meanwhile, internal politics and fear within the prison system hindered transparency and progress. The investigation became a symbol of the wider struggle between justice and corruption. It exposed how power can be abused within closed systems, where loyalty is enforced through fear and truth is a casualty. Marla Grayson's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous prisons aren't made of bars and concrete, but of secrets and silence. In the end, Arnold Draymond disguised to protect those who wielded power, or was it murder disguised to protect those who wielded power? The answer may never be fully known.